the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has benefited by having the three of you there, understanding the role historically that energy has played. It has grown Pennsylvania into the Keystone State, something that we're all proud of. Again, rich history from manufacturing, from agriculture. But we wanted to make certain that when we had this conversation with the three of you, that from a think about energy standpoint, from a Cabot oil and gas standpoint, we want to bring our partners in and have them share with you also. So at this point, I'm going to roll over. We're going to add to the conversation Anne Bradbury and Gene Bar. And it'll be my pleasure to have Anne ask the first question of the three of you. Again, if you haven't met Anne, you need to. She is a true leader in our industry. It's a group that Cabot and companies like XTO, EQT, Seneca, and others are engaged with here in the Commonwealth. She's leading those efforts in DC. So again, Anne, if you're there, I will turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, George, for those kind words. And thank you so much, Congressman, for your time today and for all you are doing to help Americans as we get through this very difficult time. As you're probably aware, AXPC is the National Trade Association representing large independent U.S. oil and gas producers. Cabot is one of our great members, and we have a number of members in Pennsylvania who are either based there or who have a presence there. The energy industry, as you know, has been hit incredibly hard by this global pandemic. As the global economy has shut down, so has demand for our products. Our industry has said that we are not seeking any special help from the government in the form of a bailout, but rather in the short term, we need tools to manage through this crisis. And in the long term, we really need global demand for our products to come back. So I'm in Washington. You all are still at home. The Senate is back in DC. So as the House and Senate can contemplate coming back and prepare to come back to DC, can you talk a little bit about what solutions are being considered as part of the next phase to help restart the U.S. economy and help get Americans back to work?
Well, why don't I jump in?
That'd be great.
I don't know if you were addressing that to anyone particular, but
any one of you.
I'll start. We've got a group, the three of us and the entire Pennsylvania Congressional Republican delegation is a great team. So, but let me just get us started. Obviously, we've been working on emergency response. We've had 4 pieces of legislation. Part of that has really been focused on keeping our economy, the way I like to describe it, is on idle. America's economic engine has been actually, and over the past year, it's been like a high-performing race car engine, and it's setting all kinds of records with record unemployment, low unemployment, gross domestic product growth, return on investments. It was really historically one of the best times we've ever had in our nation. And then overnight, because of a virus and declarations that followed, mostly from governors, that engine was turned off overnight. And that happened in all segments and sectors, including obviously oil and gas and energy specifically. And we know that the kind of things we've been doing, I do use the analogy of the race car engine, because if you take a high performing engine and you let it to go cold, when it comes time to turn it back on, it takes forever to get back up to that peak capacity performance. And so much of what we've been doing has been emergency response, really to save lives, but also to save jobs and to at least keep our economy on idle. I think the oil and gas industry has been expeditiously hurt. The one statistic I shared with you from the Energy Administration was 32% decrease, reduction in the use of gasoline, and that was during a 4-week period, mid-March to about mid-April. That obviously has continued up to this point. Now we're in May, And I have to say that that's been absolutely devastating. We all know the stories about, the historical net or zero, the negative pricing for oil on April 20th, the lack of storage area. And so some of the things we've tried to do, obviously, as the president in particular has tried to open up our strategic petroleum reserve for the place to be able to park different, production, and recognizing that the best thing that we can do is to get this economy turned back on and to get it going to a robust level. That's probably going to have some challenges, I think, with confidence in certain areas. In certain areas, maybe not so much, where much of COVID-19 experience has been what you see on the cable news network and perhaps not in our communities. I happen to, along with Fred, we live in among the 24 counties that largely have been turned somewhat back on to yellow status, low incidence of COVID-19. But I think there is going to be some challenges with confidence and overcoming some anxiety for people to get out, to get moving, to be traveling. Although obviously not all energy is utilized there, but transportation is a huge part of it. And so, as we turn the lights back on, get manufacturing back going, all extremely important. Probably the most important thing that we can do. I think one of the other things I would throw in there, and yield to my colleagues, is, we've just got done negotiating some really significant trade agreements, and I'm so glad that we did that, and I'm so appreciative of the president's leadership. In fact, I think he's been all those critics of what he did when we see how much we're still dependent on China for when it came to personal protective equipment and different things. He really made the point about of rebuilding America's manufacturing to expanding that, repatriating part of that. But I do think the trade agreements in particular are something that I think we're going to encourage the administration to lean into China, lean into Mexico and Canada, all the other trade agreements that have been worked on that involved energy, so that we can help to loosen up, get that oversupply, getting that out into the markets and those foreign markets in particular.
GT, I appreciate your insights on that. I'd be curious, Guy. I know you're ready to speak in and share what you're thinking, sir. What do you see?
George, you saw me go for the unmute button, I see. Yeah. Well, I'd echo what GT said, but I think you can distill this down into this. If you want to get the economy back on track, and this goes for now, or I think at any period, you have to do two things, or better yet, two things simultaneously. And that's one, you have to reduce taxation. And second, you have to reduce regulation. And regulation from an economic point of view is just another form of taxation. So looking forward, we can look to make the tax cuts permanent. I still think they're too high. We should also look at the payroll tax cut or a freeze. That's going to help not only employers, it's going to help employees take more money home. That will help stimulate the economy. But a lot of the unnecessary regulation we should do away with, and we should unchain not only oil and gas, but the entire U.S. economy to actually perform. So we can do those two things. Gene Bar, I know you're on this call. I think we should also look at liability issues. So when we do come back, there aren't frivolous lawsuits. And I'm not saying it has to be all cases. There's a middle ground that we could probably work out. There has to be some kind of protection or some kind of standard to incentivize businesses to come back without the fear of repercussions in court. And there's a lot of talk about a T&I package. I'd be a huge supporter of this. I think we need better roads and bridges. We also need better locks and bans. In Western Pennsylvania, we got locks that haven't been really even improved much since the 20s and 30s. So we could work to improve that. And we should also look at rural broadband and some other packages as well. And then I'll end on this. As far as our supply chain, bringing it back, of course, that's going to be incredibly important. But we should make businesses want to move back to the United States. We should have an environment that actually welcomes business, innovation, and expanding businesses right here. And again, you do that by reducing the corporate income tax, reducing taxes, and reducing regulation, and making this this nation a really good place to manufacture and do other kinds of business again. So with that, George, I'll kick it back to you.
I appreciate that. Fred, I don't know if you have anything to add to Anne's question. Again, I know we're going to bring Gene Bar in next, but Fred, I see you're on the unmute, so you have the floor, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, my colleagues have said it so very well about what we need to do and what we need to look at doing. I get the regulation and doing all that stuff. We need to do it. We need to make sure it happens. And, we need to embrace business, and we need to embrace success. Sometime over my lifetime, it seems to change that when, success was a good thing. Now some people look at companies and businesses like they shouldn't be successful. They absolutely should, because we own those companies and businesses as Americans, as people that go to work every day. I think one important thing we might have learned is how responsive and quickly things can get done. When you look at what happened with the Javits Center and setting that up, also looking at the length of time it takes to get approvals and get things done as companies. Time is money. And when we have our natural gas companies that are waiting for decisions and that kind of stuff, let's make sure our government is responsive, not just in times of crisis, but in times when our businesses are trying to get us back on our feet. So we need to look at that. One thing I would say as far as what we look at, and I know there's been some discussions of making things transformative and far-reaching in future legislation. We got to be very careful of that. What we do in Congress needs to be narrowly focused to address the issues before the American people, get our economy back up and running, and looking also at, as my colleague Guy Raschendauer said, the infrastructure. Let's include broadband in that, and I've always said, let's include natural gas pipelines in that too, so that we can use some more of that energy right here at home in our communities. So with that, that's really what I had to add. I think my colleagues did a great job with it.
Well, don't go anywhere, Fred, because I'm going to turn it back to Anne, and we'll start with you on the response. So, Anne, I think you had a follow-up question, so I'll do that.
Well, a couple of you all mentioned China in your remarks as well. AXPC recently sent a letter to the trade representative encouraging the administration to hold China accountable, because as part of the Phase 1 trade agreement, China agreed to increase purchase of energy products by $50 billion over the next 2 years. And we think by holding them accountable to this commitment that was made earlier this year, this could be a really useful tool to help spur demand from our product from somewhere as China is emerging from the global pandemic and starting to reopen their economy, and to even maybe address some of the supply issues in the short term that we're facing. So I wasn't sure if that was on your radar screen at all, but especially, as we're having this larger China conversation and larger trade question, I would just encourage you, and I'm happy to send some information to keep that in mind, and to help encourage the administration to hold China accountable, and from your roles in Congress on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and from your other perspectives as well. So I don't know if anyone would like to comment or add anything to that.
Guy, I'll throw that to you from a national security standpoint.
Okay, sounds good. I'll talk about national security, but let me just say, Anne, yes, I definitely support holding China accountable to that deal, or holding them to that deal. For way too long, we've allowed China to sign onto these agreements and then not abide by them. The best example is when we let them into the World Trade Organization. Their economy has grown tenfold since they came in the WTO, and they do not act in the concert of nations in the World Trade Organization. They almost act as a rogue player in that organization. So it's time we hold them accountable, not only with this deal in particular. And again, I'll do whatever I can to encourage the administration to hold China to this deal, but also the forced IP transfers that they do, the domestic spying that they do, or the corporate espionage that they do. It goes on. And that's not even to mention the dumping of steel, of carbon. And now the fact they've taken a lot of our pharmaceuticals, and they've done it in a strategic way where they move the pharmaceuticals to China and they undercut the costs, and so it drives out a lot of our business out. So it's a huge problem. On the national security front with China, we've got to do something to make sure that we stay competitive. We can't let them use Huawei as a backdoor so they can engage in espionage. We can't allow, for example, our light rail to be run on their systems where they can shut it down again. But just globally speaking about national security, the best thing that we can do is we can be net energy exporters. I'd rather see us taking liquefied natural gas from the port in Philadelphia, sending it to Gdansk, Poland, and putting Putin on his heels. Because when Putin goes to shut off the energy supply to Eastern Europe and Western Europe, we're going to be the ones that are there to supply them and our allies with energy. That's going to go a long way. And also just us producing natural gas is driving down the cost of petroleum. You've seen some liberalization in Saudi Arabia. That's because we are disturbing the petroleum market. The Venezuelan economy has collapsed because of natural gas, a lot of it because we're taking it right here in Pennsylvania and putting it on the world market. So as we continue to produce our own gas and our own energy, and as we continue to export, we show the flaws in these petro states. Most of them are not friendly. A lot of them are adversarial to us, like Venezuela. We also take our own destiny in our hands when we come with energy, and we are not beholden to another nation for our energy supply. So thank you for the question, Anne. I appreciate it.
Well, I thank you for your response also, Guy. Again, I know we're blessed having you there in D.C. I'm going to transition. Anne gets to stay with us, but I do want to bring in Gene Bar because, again, we're leading on a national stage. Anne's helping us get that done in D.C., but we also have a real leader in Gene Bar with a large chamber that, again, a lot of us energy companies, pipeline companies are members of. And Gene has really taken the leadership role on of ensuring that business's voice is heard. So again, Gene, welcome to the conversation, and I'll give you the microphone, sir.
George, thank you. Thanks for the invite here. It's good to be with three of my favorite members of the Pennsylvania delegation. It's good to see you guys. How you doing?
Oh, good. Good to see you, Gene.
Hey, I can't let go before I get into the energy stuff without acknowledging what Guy said about liability. I mean, this is absolutely crucial. We will not get the startup we need unless we provide a limited liability to businesses. This is not blanket immunity. This says it's narrow, it's targeted, and it's temporary in order to get this economy back up and running. So I thank you for bringing that up. And I know all three of you will be supporting that and have always been supportive of things that make sense from that basis. To be honest, we've already seen trial lawyers advertising on social media for clients, and we know what's going to happen to our members when they try and come back. They're going to get hit with this thing. So thanks to the three of you for agreeing to take a look at that. It's absolutely crucial. Let me just lead in on a comment quickly before I get into my question. And you guys have acknowledged this. We've heard a lot about the people who want to ban hydraulic fracturing, who want to ban fossil fuels. And to me, just as a real quick pushback, anyone who has looked at what the oil and natural gas industry in this country, in this Commonwealth has done, one of the great examples of being able to produce the raw materials to make PPE. One of the great stories was the individuals who had themselves locked in down at Braskem and Marcus Hook down in my old area to make the raw material to make PPE. A great story. We can't do that without a U.S. oil, natural gas industry. We cannot do it. You've talked a lot about what's been sent over to China. It's a great story, and it's only made possible because of having domestic energy. So let me lead into this. We're kind of at a crossroads here. I'm kind of interested in your perspective because we're in the most critical economic time that all of us have been in our lifetimes. And a lot of discussion before we went into this. 7 weeks ago, we had, as you noted, GT, an extremely strong economy. We're discussing what do we do about climate change. And of course, we've seen the reductions in CO2 because of the enhanced utilization of natural gas. And there are going to be people who are going to want to come back and take another look at what we do with renewables. And I think we're kind of at an interesting crossroads here. We're going to have some people who are going to want to remake this energy sector. You already noted the Green New Deal people who are going to want to completely move in a different direction and dictate what Americans and Pennsylvanians buy rather than relying on what got us to this point, which is the consumer choosing among a vast array of sources, including natural gas and nuclear and coal and renewables, which are an important part of that portfolio. And at the same time, we have the ability, given that we've taken on so much debt, to continue to produce a product that the world can use. You guys talked about sending it over to Europe and coming up with new markets. I'm just incredulous that people will want to shut that down, but it strikes me we are at a crossroads here. So how do we continue on the successful path that got us to the economy we had up until about 2 months ago?
Well, let me jump in there to start with, Gene, and your points are all spot on. I think it's to make sure that we continue, not just us, but the coalition of people who understand what really built this nation and what will restore this nation economically after this COVID-19, what it really takes. And it needs to be an advocacy and debate that is based on science and fact, because the other side uses science, but it's political science and emotion. And we've already seen it. I mean, we saw it with all four of the coronavirus pieces of legislation that we voted on, and many of those were delayed, critically delayed for an extended period of time because of the opposition, the other side that wanted to put things like the new Green Deal into these pieces of legislation. They wanted to take advantage of the emotion to move forward a political agenda. I mean, I think that it's going to take a concerted effort. It's going to take a concerted voice and really a united voice, but one that is based on actually the science and the facts are on our side. And I think that part of that will be not playing defense, but being on offense, of proposing legislation that is grounded in science, grounded in facts, of why we need to do the things that need to happen, like the limited liability protections. Because you're absolutely correct. The trial lawyers are swimming like sharks. They're looking for individual suits, and we'll probably start seeing class action suits. People, whether it was folks in nursing homes, people that were life essential, working in businesses, and unfortunately contracted this coronavirus. Odds are that happened at home, but those employers will be targeted. So I think it's being on offense, it's having a great voice, and really focusing what we do based on real facts and real science, and then communicating that to the American people so that they understand it. And I know facts are a little harder to sell than emotion, but that just means we've got to do a better job of it.
Appreciate that, GT. Yourself, Guy?
Yeah, thanks, George. I appreciate it. I agree with GT. We've got to make sure that we get the facts out there to individuals, but we also have to call out their hypocrisy. Gene mentioned those that want to ban fracking in the Green New Deal. We have to remind people that this community, and when I say this community, the Green New Deal folks, they're the ones that wanted to keep us in the Paris Climate Accord. We are the only nation that signed on to that agreement that has actually reduced our CO2 emissions. And we should remind individuals of that. As far as China goes in that agreement and some other nations, they don't even need to drop until they hit a 2030 level. So it's an absolute farce. It's a work of fiction that the United States is not doing more to reduce our CO2. But we're not reducing our CO2 emissions because we're chasing these fantasies that they have in the Green New Deal. We're doing it because we've unleashed natural gas in the fracking industry. And now natural gas, which I consider a clean energy source, is reducing our CO2 emission, and we continue to drop. So we need to continue to remind people of that. We also have to, if we can't persuade people through the environmental benefits of natural gas, we should remind them of the economic benefits of it to the individual. Think about the person or the family that's living paycheck to paycheck in New England. Think about how they have to import petroleum from Russia and how much that adds to their costs. Governor Cuomo, with his ban on fracking and his ban on taking natural gas from Pennsylvania into New York, is not only leaving us vulnerable in terms of national security to Russia, but it's also exposing those citizens in New England to higher energy costs. Like I said before, the average family here in Pennsylvania saves almost $1,200 a year, or roughly $1,200 a year, because of cheap and abundant natural gas. Those savings are not available to those that are living in New England because of Cuomo's ban. So we got to point that out. And we also need to, and I'll wrap on this, we need to make sure that we also tie it to manufacturing. Because I guarantee you, every one of those individuals that signed into that Green New Deal grabbed their smartphone and tweeted about it. How can you make a smartphone without petrochemicals? It's impossible. And I bet they go into their local REI shop or wherever, and they get a vegan bar that's wrapped in a petrochemical. It's absolute hypocrisy. So we've got to make sure that we tie petrochemicals to not only reduction in CO2 emission, national security, low cost for consumers, but also bring it full circle and talk about how much is manufactured from petrochemicals and how those petrochemicals improve our quality of life. So thank you, George.
No, thank you, truly. I mean, again, we're hearing from Gene. He knows what's happening. He gave the best example of workers being in a facility for 28 days, making critical infrastructure, PPE, to make certain our healthcare workers are protected. The reality is, and the chat is just breaking out all on infrastructure. I mean, I've got at least a dozen questions that are focused on infrastructure, because what it's obvious people are asking is, as you go back to DC, please consider the infrastructure bill. Because again, if we're going to bring manufacturing back, you also mentioned, pharmaceuticals. We've got questions there about consolidating down pharmaceuticals, getting them off of mainland China, getting them here. The infrastructure bill would be a big critical component to ensure that things that need to move, whether it's trucks or pipelines, are enhanced to allow for this robust advanced manufacturing, because we saw it, whether it's PPE or ventilators, you're going to need plastics in that to make those. You need it necessary. So again, as you go back, there is a strong desire to make certain, as you're looking at that infrastructure bill, that you don't overlook the opportunity to make our country, our nation stronger as a result to enhanced infrastructure. Fred, you got the floor, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, looking at what my colleague said, I couldn't have said it any better. And, I always go to that, look at the benefits and look at the things we use in our everyday life. And I think Guy said that so very, very well. The other thing I'd like to make sure that the people that don't want our fossil fuels and they're for the Green New Deal. And I saw this in committee meetings and I brought it up. And here's the point. Who owns these companies? They like to take and talk about businesses like there's some nebulous, thing that you can't see or can't touch. Who owns these? I tell you what, Thrift Savings Plan owns these. And the same people that are producing the Green New Deal are benefiting from the profits of corporations. So again, they're not bad people. We need that education as far as, what our smartphones made from and the affordability that now people in America, these are the people that are supposed to help, be wanting to help the people on the lowest end of the income scale. Well, the way to help them is to make sure that the things that they need in everyday life are less expensive. And that happens through an abundance of natural resources right here, homegrown in America, where it's safer and we know how it's produced and we have lowered our emissions. But also, who owns these companies? The people that own Exxon and Cabot and all these places are the school teacher, the retail clerk, the farmer, the auto worker, all the people in our community, our families, friends, and neighbors. And we have to make sure that point is brought up every time when people talk about how bad, and I hear that, they say, well, these companies, well, who are these companies? These companies are the capitalistic society that built the greatest economy in the world. And they are because people own them, people in the communities, and the companies care. And I keep going back to this, but it's a perfect example of what Cabot has done, prior to the investments that have been made in education, prior to the pandemic that are continuing, but then also how you're helping the neighbors right here with the food banks and so on. So again, I think that education is key. And working with Gene in the past, I know you've been outstanding. We need to also make sure that our business people are helping us communicate that with their employees and the people that come to work every day. One thing I realized when I worked in the factory, I trusted the people that ran the factory and owned the business, because then I later ran that factory. And you care about your employees. And that's really a good group of people to say, hey, help us get the word out. But it's our job to do it. We'll continue to do it. And we have a great team in Pennsylvania, Guy and GT. It's a pleasure to work with them and the rest of the delegation. They've been outstanding. So I guess I would just say, build upon what they said. They said it very well, but just let's put a face to who owns the companies. And I think that's so important in this day and age, because people don't like to recognize that.
Well, Fred, there's no doubt that in Harrisburg, the face of companies is Gene. I just want to come back to you, Gene, because I don't want to leave you hanging. I know you had a couple other follow-ups there. So I'm going to give you the microphone, Gene. We're getting near the end here, but I'll give you not the last word, but I'll give you an opportunity once again, Gene.
George, I appreciate that. There is something I'd like to follow up on, and you guys touched on this a bit, and it's one that George and I have talked about, as well as many of our other companies that are involved in this, and it's extremely frustrating. You have so many folks who acknowledge, yeah, you know what, the Russians involved themselves in the election, and the Russians this and the Russians that. But nobody wants to talk about the other side of this, which is the abundant information that shows, and a lot of you and your colleagues have brought this information up, and we need the media to pay attention, that shows the Russians have been engaged in trying to run down the U.S. and Pennsylvania energy economies. And it's kind of funny, you talk to people who go, oh, yeah, the Russians did this in elections and the Russians in elections, but of course they would never do anything on the economy. And when you look back, you can track the money that goes to some of these groups who are opposing the development of U.S. and Pennsylvania energy supplies. And we know it tracks directly back, and it results in this. It results in something that you guys were hinting at a moment ago. It results in Russian natural gas coming into Boston Harbor, when in reality, Pennsylvania natural gas should be easily supplying New England, and it would make one heck of a lot more sense on so many levels. So any thoughts any of you have on that?
I remember when I was first elected 12 years ago, and we were losing the fracking argument and debate at that point. I kept two binders. One, I kept track of anything that came out in Pennsylvania that was an anti-natural gas production article, and I kept a binder for all the positive pro-natural gas production. The pro-natural gas, now this was back in 2009. It was a half-inch binder with only a couple sheets of paper in it. The negative stuff that was pushed out, the propaganda, I had three ring notebooks full. We were losing. And at that point in time, and it's not just the covert things that you referenced, the Russians were overt in this. I was shocked to find out in my rural cable network that we use, that Penny and I use to get access to television, that one of the choices there was RT Today, which most people had no idea that was Russia Today. It was coming right into our living rooms, right into our televisions with all this anti-natural gas propaganda. I mean, they were fueling, and then we know they were also doing things with, initiating, stimulating activists to getting things going. So they were very overt as well with what Russia was doing. So, and it shouldn't surprise us. That's what Russia does. And if we know that they do that and we're aware of it, and then shame on us if we allow them to beat us with that. That's where we need to have a louder voice, more clear vision, and really share the facts. And I think we've done it rather well. I've been really proud of Cabot and the other businesses and industries in the oil gas sector here in Pennsylvania, because we were getting our butts kicked when it came to anti-hydrofracking back in 2009. And today, I would say largely, we've won that fight. We've shown the technology. We've shown the procedures that are used, because not only did they institute those measures, they communicated well about them. I think that's just an example of that we can win this, but it's going to take continued due diligence and effort in terms of our communicating.
And that's one of our goals. We definitely want to make certain that we're communicating. And one of the things I'm going to make certain we do here today, because again, the questions just keep coming in from the audience, we will share the questions and points that we're getting from the audience. Because, I mean, Brittany Ramos, Dan Markheim, I mean, they just keep coming in. We'll get those to you. Guy, I know you have a hard stop that you need to head to another meeting. Is there one last thing you want to say before you need to sign off, Congressman?
Yes, George. I do want to say if you guys want to do this again, just a Q&A, I'd be more than willing to come back and I can coordinate with Mike. I don't want to, in the Navy, we would call that being voluntold. So I don't want to volunteer anybody to do anything, but I'm more than willing to come back. G made a great point about Russia and the fact that no one paid attention to Russia's manipulation. You know, I think when we hear about Russian collusion, the real collusion is with Governor Cuomo and Putin to keep Pennsylvania natural gas out of New England. That's the real Russian collusion that's going on there. But I just want to hit one point of hypocrisy and irony that's coming from the Green New Deal crowd. And it's this: as they push for these alternative forms of energy, those of course take a whole bunch of batteries, rare earth materials. Well, go to Africa where China is mining those materials, especially for batteries, and look at how poorly the environment is being treated there. Or take a look at Tibet, where China is going in and mining these rare earth materials. Let me just give you a preview. China really doesn't care about the environment in Tibet. So we are actually doing more harm to globally when we pursue these alternative forms of energy and just push out natural gas, because I can guarantee you that any natural gas site in the United States, in Pennsylvania in particular, is going to be far cleaner than any project that China is doing in Tibet or China. And with that, I've got to jump off.
Yes,
but
sir.
Thank you, everybody, for being on this call. I really appreciate it. And thanks, George, and thanks, Matt, for putting it together. And I enjoyed being with my colleagues as well. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you coming. You sign off, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I want to make that point to Fred and to GT. You know, here we are in Susquehanna County, and we know that the United States regulations, we know Pennsylvania regulations, and it's our natural gas underneath the farmers from Susquehanna County, Donna Williams, underneath her farm. That gas 33 days later will make itself from Cove Point through the Panama Canal and get to Japan. And again, you know the care that we take to ensure that we're producing that natural gas in the cleanest environment. And again, we know the United States regulations, we know Pennsylvania regulations, but again, to have that gas to be able to get to Japan that clearly, that quickly, just shows the energy security that we ought to have. And again, to think that somehow overland we can't get to Massachusetts in a straight pipeline, it's ridiculous to me to have folks in New England pay 4 times as much for their energy at a time when they're unemployed. So again, we're going to end up wrapping up here. Again, I want to thank Gene and Anne for joining in with us today. Again, GT, Fred, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom. I'm going to ask you to do your own wrap up here. GT, we are on a clock, so I'll start with you first, but I need you to be brief, sir.
Sure. Well, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Cabot. George, thanks to you, Gene and Ann, and my colleagues, and all those and quite frankly, most importantly, all those who are watching this webinar that are involved in the energy industry. Our Pennsylvania energy was a huge part of the Great American Comeback, and it will be a huge part of this second edition post-COVID-19 of the Great American Comeback.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Fred, last word from you, sir.
Thank you, George. And again, thanks to Gene and Ann and the entire, everybody that's participating, my colleagues. It's really a pleasure to help work on behalf of the people of Pennsylvania and America with them. I would just say, and sort of just build on what Guy had said about China and the things that are happening and the things they'll do. They care about control, and that's the only thing they care about. We care about people. We care about the values of America. And I think that strong energy, strong agriculture will get us there. But energy is a critical part of that. I would make the offer that if we do have questions, maybe we could get those to some of our teams, and we'll get answers, and you guys can get them back to the group. Would also like to participate in more forums. I know we've done some live. It's always great to get the word out, because I know that, like the American people, the people that work for our natural gas and our energy producers do an outstanding job. And with that, I'll say thank you so much and have a great afternoon.
Well, again, to both of you, also to Anne and Gene for joining us. We think it's always critical to have leading voices from DC and our state capitals join us, but I can't thank you enough for taking time out. It's clear there was an interest. We had well over 100 participants today. We want to keep you informed and connected with your constituents, and we will share the comments and the questions that we got back, because again, I couldn't keep up with them as quickly as they were coming in. I think, again, you see that the folks here want to be engaged and connected with you and help promote pro-energy, pro-Pennsylvania agenda. So with that said, again, thank you very much. This will be recorded. Well, the opportunity will be to share it for those who participated today and want to get it to their coworkers. Again, we will have that pulled down and get it up on the Think About Energy webpage. Can't thank everybody enough. Truly appreciate everyone joining in. Matt, I'll hand it back to you if there's any last-minute logistical issues, sir.
Thank you, George, and thank you, everybody. As George mentioned and the representatives offered, we will get the questions answered and post them on our website. So I'd encourage everybody to join the discussion and go to thinkaboutbriefing.com or follow us on Twitter at energy_briefing, where you find some more information about upcoming events. I'll look for an email here within a day or two with the questions answered and links to the recording. So with that, on behalf of the entire Think About Energy briefing team, thank you for your participation and hope everybody stays safe. Have a good day.